One theme that runs current between many of these scandals is the idea of plausible deniability, that a presidential administration will authorize a clandestine mission only as long as they maintain a level of plausible deniability, that they can say, I do not recall the details of this meeting.
It's theatrics to think a special assistant to the president can launch a project that would attempt to overthrow a government and circumvent the United States Congress.
But why? Less than 2 decades after President Richard Nixon's humiliating resignation, would Ronald Reagan put his presidency, his party, and arguably the entire nation at such great risk?
The Reagan administration was a conviction presidency. Very principled conservatives who had a very strong ideological bent. And that justified doing almost anything, even when it was illegal.
There are even those who claim that the real cover-up wasn't the involvement of President Ronald Reagan, but the more secret involvement of a man who had been the former director of the CIA, Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush.
The reality of the Iran-Contra affair is all of this was directed from the White House by Vice President George H.W. Bush. Oliver North was directly attached to his staff. Oliver North was later selected to be the fall guy, and above all, prevent the scandal from reaching George H.W. Bush, who of course was preparing his run for president in 1988.
As a historian who admires Ronald Reagan, I think he knew all of it. I just can't conceive of a president giving up that kind of power or forfeiting that kind of power. Iran-Contra turned into a cover-up because the president's men and women around him claimed he didn't know about it. The president himself played along with it.
Do you have any recollection of approving for John Poindexter to send these specific letters to Congress?
Well, again, it's a case of memory. I don't recall.
Coming up,
Sandy Berger was purging the historical record that was intended to incriminate the Clinton administration.
We've become a country with a presidency that thinks it's above the law.
Washington, D.C., July 2004. President Bill Clinton's former National Security Advisor, Sandy Berger, is brought before the U.S. Justice Department on charges of illegally removing classified documents and presidential papers from the National Archives. They had been requested as part of Congress's investigation into the murder of nearly 3,000 Americans on September 11th, 2001.
Sandy Berger was conducting some research in the National Archives, and it was revealed ultimately that the archival record that was being held there at the facility, he was purging it of information that tended to incriminate the Clinton administration.
During testimony, Berger admitted to inadvertently putting a total of 5 documents related to the thwarted Millennium attack plots in his briefcase.
He stole copies of classified documents and possibly even some originals. Some of those may have included handwritten notations from the president himself. These documents related to analyses of the Clinton administration's response to terrorist actions.
But there are those who maintain that Berger removed not just a handful of documents, but dozens of them. And there are even a few that allege he removed them not inadvertently, but by deliberately hiding them in his clothes and even in his socks. But if so, why? What could have been so damaging to President Clinton that would prompt his former national security advisor to risk his entire career?
Critics say the Clinton administration had plenty of overt acts of terror committed on its watch. The 1993 attack on the World Trade Center, the bombings of American embassies in Africa, the bombing of the USS Cole. Despite all of these very terrible terrorist activities, the Clinton administration never launched a concerted campaign against al-Qaeda or other terrorist elements. What President Clinton may have been trying to hide with respect to the Millennium Plots and other acts of terror is that he dropped the ball.
I deeply regret it. It was mistaken and it was wrong.
Berger ultimately pleaded guilty to a charge of unauthorized removal and retention of classified material, for which he was fined $50,000 and sentenced to serve 2 years of probation and 100 hours of community service. But why was such an outrageous offense punished with what many believed to be nothing more than a slap on the wrist?
Well, the way our government is constructed is to have a rough check and balance with a rough balance of power. But since really World War II and the Depression, that has shifted towards the presidency. We're the only superpower, and when that happens, the president becomes more important. And so we've become, in many ways, a country with an imperial presidency that sometimes thinks it's above the law, a presidency that has abrogated to itself all sorts of powers, and that imperial status, which is dangerous in a democracy, in some ways, though, was inevitable because of the rise of American power internationally. An imperial power, a power with its tentacles all over the globe, seems to necessitate a strong centralized presidency.
Has the office of President of the United States become so cynical towards the American people and their laws that almost all behavior can be justified under the guise of national security? When it comes to the White House, do they really believe the ends justify the means?
The last 8 American presidents before Barack Obama, think about this, only 4 of them were reelected. And of the 4 who were reelected, 1 was impeached, 1 resigned, and 1 left office in disgrace with the lowest approval rating of any president his last month in office. Only 1 president of the last 8 left with any degree of dignity intact, and that was Ronald Reagan, and he experienced Iran-Contra.
Has the president's power to work autonomously to bypass Congress and to cover up illegal actions only grown greater as the United States has expanded its presence around the globe? And is it possible, with the aid of new technology and under the premise of fighting terror, that the president could even conduct a secret war? A war that would not only be fought against foreign enemies, but even against American citizens here at home. Coming up.
When the drone wars become the object of a cover-up, the targeted assassination of U.S. citizens without due process of law, that may already be impeachable.
Washington, D.C., February 6th, 2013. Under pressure from Congress, President Barack Obama agrees to allow the Senate and House Intelligence Committees to review classified legal memos regarding a drone strike in Yemen in 2011. A strike that targeted and killed a U.S. citizen. Born in New Mexico, Anwar al-Awlaki was a known al-Qaeda terrorist who was instrumental in recruiting American jihadists over the internet. Also killed in the strike was his 16-year-old son, Abdul Rahman.
Drone wars become the object of a cover-up when, for example, American citizens are killed by drones. Right? And we have one big example, right? Anwar al-Awlaki. That takes you beyond the pale. That takes you into the targeted assassination of U.S. citizens without due process of law. That may already be impeachable.
With a growing arsenal of high-tech tools available to the White House, has the commander-in-chief gained even greater ability to wage secret wars and conduct covert operations, even when those operations target U.S. citizens believed to be engaged in acts of terror?
We have Terror Tuesdays at the White House every week with John Brennan essentially deciding who's going to live and die. Economic sanctions, economic warfare, another important part. Cyber warfare, color revolutions, destabilizations, what they call buck passing. If you want to bring down Libya, don't attack Libya, let France attack Libya. You want to bring down Syria, get Turkey to do most of the dangerous work, and so forth. So there's a different kind of foreign policy. The drones are at the center of it.
Longtime observers of Washington politics know a full-fledged cover-up is only attempted by the White House as a last resort. Not only is it less effective, especially in today's 24/7 information age, but it is also less preferable to two other means by which the president or his staff may hide the truth: spin and controlled leaking.
Presidents are masters of the leak. It's very valuable. They use leaks all the time. They may wake up in the morning and then be the first order of business is, what are we leaking and how and why?
A controlled leak would be, for example, they'll have a staffer call a friendly news reporter and say, you know, the president's thinking of appointing John Smith to be Secretary of the FX. And then they write about that the next day in their column, and then people start commenting on it, and you see, well, oh, there's a lot of kickback.
There are things that they want people to find that they'll cover up because they want them to find them. And then there's misdirection because they don't want them to find something that they're on. So that's how sophisticated this spy versus spy versus spy is at the presidential level.
We are in a brave new world of transparency, a brave new world where the freedom of information is such that people expect it at all times.
Have presidential cover-ups become so sophisticated that the American public will never really know what goes on behind the doors of the Oval Office? Are secret operations, covert wars, and even political assassinations actually being perpetrated by the leaders of the free world? And if so, are they ever justified?
Presidential cover-ups are necessary sometimes for American national security. They're necessary when a president has to undertake an operation where it has to remain secret or the entire operation will get blown. There are good reasons for presidents to do things in secret.
There was a time when the public was much more comfortable with the idea of a presidential administration that's willing to bend the rules and the presidential administration that's willing to do things in a less than transparent way. But those days are gone.
Perhaps the only real protection the American public can have against an unscrupulous or unethical commander-in-chief isn't from the